Thanks for tuning in to this really exciting chat that we have here. It's my pleasure to introduce, and I'll kind of let her introduce herself in a bit as well, introduce Tamar Yehoshua, who is the Chief Product Officer at Snyk, but also has this amazing background as a VP Engineering or Product and Engineering in Google, at Amazon. And I'm especially kind of fortunate to share that Tamar is also a director on Snyk's board. So we've been very lucky to have her and her insights with us. Specifically, Tamar has this super rich perspective around independent teams, both from these kind of early adopters of it in Amazon at Google, from today's Snyk, and Snyk itself is a great tool for empowering all of those. So we're going to dig into that and talk about that a lot. Tamar, really great to have you on. Thanks for coming on and doing this talk with us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So Tamar, just to get us started, can you share a little bit about yourself? Like, what is your role? And maybe give us a sense of the magnitude of the team you run today at Snyk.
So as you said, I'm the Chief Product Officer at Snyk, and I run a team that is comprised of product managers, designers, research and analytics, and developer relations. And I work very closely with the co-founder and CTO who runs the engineering team.
Got it. And how do you work? Indeed, we talked about this independent teams. Is that how you operate when you think about these different teams? How do you think about ownership or decision power between those teams?
It's a really common question that product managers always want to know is, what is my decision-making authority? What can I decide? And it's always tricky because there's not a clear answer, because the answer is you want to build something that customers love. And that's really always your goal. And the way that we think of it, we borrow from the Amazon terminology of one-way and two-way doors, is that if there's a one-way door that you can experiment and it's easy to change, then go for it. Don't ask for permission and try things out. But there's some things that are two-way doors that are very hard to back out afterwards, functionality that you give customers and it's hard to take away, or things like how you set up your authentication and how you set up your usernames. Those are really hard to change later. So we want people to recognize the things that are hard to change versus easy to change, and try and give people as much autonomy as we can within the things that they own and have clear ownership of.
And they, from a high level mandate, so this makes sense in terms of maybe some constraints or maybe decision power indeed. Like, how do you communicate the mandate to them? Like, what is their even sort of scope of responsibility? How do you think about aligning on that to ensure you're on the same page?
So we try and align by what problem you're solving as opposed to the solution that you're taking. So we have something, we use the DRI model, the directly responsible individual. And so we try and have, for any large project, a DRI, and the DRI knows that they're responsible for the outcomes. So whether it's one person who's responsible for the self-service funnel, and then they work with the engineering team, marketing, finance, whoever is needed to achieve the goals that we have on our self-service funnel. So that's one example. So everything is tried to be separated into those areas of ownership, and from a customer viewpoint or from a business viewpoint, and not from the solution of this is the way we're going to do it. So and we're always refining. One of the things that I've found in my career is that organizations are fluid, products are fluid. So you have to take a stance of this is the right thing for right now. But as the ecosystem shifts, as your competitors shift, you're going to keep on adjusting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's very well said. It's something we experience at Snyk as well. You have to accept that you're going to move, and the right way to divide the world, especially as the world grows, the sort of scope of activity, you need to sort of zig and zag. So this model of these kind of teams, and they need to run, and they own the self-serve funnel or others, in the industry, it's reasonably new, I would say, maybe sort of a decade-ish old. You've kind of had probably the pleasure of succeeding and failing with all sorts of variants of it, trying to do it. How do you set up the company as a whole or the organization to be successful? You talked about the customer problem. That sounds like one inkling of it. What other tips do you have around making these independent teams successful?
So making sure that the strategy is clear and people are aligned on it is really important. And then breaking it down to what piece of the strategy people own. So Slack has a master plan that Stuart put together, Stuart, our CEO and founder, put together in 2014, and it actually really hasn't changed. There's 4 tenets of the master plan of what Slack is trying to achieve, and the tactics and what we do in each of those areas, the tenets of our strategy stay the same. How we achieve them is what changes all the time. And you always have to keep coming back to it. One of the things that I've found is that no matter how many times you communicate it, people always say that they don't know what the strategy is. So just communicate it over and over and over again. So if you align on the strategy and what you're trying to achieve, it's much easier for teams to find their own footing because they know what you're trying to do. And then you want to empower people to solve that customer problem within the constraints of the strategy, because it's just as important to say what you're not doing as what you are doing. Because every new person who comes into the company is like, why aren't you doing this? And why aren't we doing that? And so for you to be able to very clearly say, not doing that, focus, here are the things that we're doing, so that you don't get people going off in directions that are not going to be aligned.
Got it. Yeah, no, and I think aligning on the strategy, like, it resonates so strongly, this notion of, like, you think you said it 10 times and it turns out, it still hasn't been said enough, or maybe it hasn't been said correctly. And so repeating and ensuring everybody's aligned, so hard.
So I have an example of that. So presented the strategy, worked on it, and then we broke up into small groups, and I had the directors in my organization repeat back the strategy. And it was amazing to see how many people could not articulate the strategy after we had just presented it. So one of my learnings that I've had is that people need to articulate the strategy in their own words. Passively looking and listening to something isn't enough, but actually articulating it and saying it out loud and saying, this is how it applies to my team. You have to personalize it. You have to say, this is why it's important to me. And all the way throughout the hierarchy, if you can get people to talk about it, and I'm constantly trying new techniques for this. So we tried something new just last quarter at Slack, is that we had all of the leads record their strategy and put it in a Slack channel for the organization. And then we asked each team to play the videos and have a discussion about it in their team meetings. So that giving them yet another tool to talk about it. And yes, it's a lot of time, but again, aligning on the strategy is so important.
Yeah, no, massively important. I love that. We're going to move this into security and how do we apply it to security in a second, but just that visual or that thought of having people explain the importance of security or the security strategy, their approach to security by the different teams, sound like such a powerful thing that you can do. So right away, it sort of brings in some powerful analogies.
Yes.
How do you communicate? Like, how do you go down a level? So you talk about the strategy, you have those constraints, you talk about the problem statements. How do you, these are complicated problems. People might be doing them for the first time. How do you get it down a level without micromanaging? We in the past we talked about like principles, but how do you think about the implementation phase, if you will, and make that consistent or aligned as well?
So we rely heavily on principles, and we have written product principles, and we try and use the same language. And so one of our product principles is don't make me think. That's just as an example, which is your product shouldn't make people feel stupid. They should open it and know what to do. And so that's something that when we have reviews, we will say, this is making people think too much. And so when you're constantly going back to principles, people remember the principles and you make them memorable. Making them memorable is so important. This is one thing I learned at Amazon. Bezos was like incredibly good at this. One year when I was at Amazon, it was all about time to glass. It wasn't about reducing latency. It was time to glass. And so getting something that people can remember, and then they will repeat, and it will be repeated in every review throughout the organization. If you say things in different ways, they don't stick. And it sounds, again, very simplistic, but it's important. And taking the time to write down your principles and think about them so you know that people are saying the same things when you're not in the room. And then we also use OKRs, the objectives and key results. And so that every quarter we set our OKRs and we review them on a weekly basis. And that's really a lot more of unblocking but people know what's being reviewed. People know what are the most important projects and people know where our attention is. So they make sure that they're aligned on those areas. And it's just about making sure that you're answering people's questions when they're veering off in other directions.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love the principles approach. So I think a lot of what you spoke about tomorrow now is sort of is a bit more visible, like, make me think, I don't know, maybe that's a little bit tricky. I don't know how visible that is. One of the challenges, if we were to sort of apply this to security, is that security is invisible. It's oftentimes, it's hard to maybe identify the wrong decision or think about a problem. Do you feel like this principle approach still works when you think about security? When you think about something that doesn't have that sort of natural feedback loop?
Absolutely. And I would say security is invisible until it's not. But I totally agree with you. And I'll take a page from when I was at Google and ran privacy, because it's very similar. You've got similar issues and people know it's important, but they don't really, it's not visible. And there we used a principled approach as well. And you can't have a principle that's like a truism, like privacy is important or security is important, because that doesn't create any conflict and that doesn't make people think about it. So for example, in privacy, it's the user is in control of their data and they should be able to delete it whenever they want. They should be able to view their data and they should be able to delete it. So you have something that's another click down that then you can meet with teams and say, okay, here are our principles. Are you adhering to that? And then most importantly is having tools so that they can do it easily. So if you say every team needs to make sure that data can be deleted and it takes quarters for an engineering team to do that, they don't know how to do it, they have to come to you, it's never going to happen. So then you create tools that are push button so that a new engineer in any team can go to a page, get clear documentation of how they need to do it, and just implement these tools. So I think you have to have both. You have to have the principles and you have to have the tools, which works for both UI centric things. Like on a UI, you have components that you can reuse. So it's easier to adhere to your UI principles. And with security and privacy, you have the tools that make it repeatable and make it hard for people to make mistakes.
Yeah. No, well, I think I love the principle of how to do it, sort of, with the principles and with the tools. I've had the privy of seeing some of the sort of the Slack product principles and those paths. And you also have these examples in there as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what role they play, like within this, I guess, system of scaling?
So we put a lot of effort into coming up with the principles initially, and they were in the fabric of the people who had been at Slack for a long time, but nobody really understood what they were. So then we wrote them in a deck, presented it, and then thought everyone knew the principles. And a year later, 30% of the company was new, and we realized, oh my God, nobody knows what these principles are. So then we took the deck out again and we added the examples of do's and don'ts, like here's when we didn't adhere to the principle, and this is where it went kind of south, and this is how we fixed it, or here's a good example. And so the deck is a thick deck that a new employee can flip through. And now we've added training on our principles to our onboarding, which of course we should have done before, but we didn't. We're learning. And so we added it to our onboarding, and we did a tour of all of the engineering and product teams at that point to make sure that they were aware. And it's a living document. So if your examples get stale, people can't relate to them. So our UX lead is the person who's the keeper of the principles, and making sure that every quarter we take a look and we change them. And sometimes we change how we talk about them. And that's one of the things that I think is the hard part, is keeping it up to date and keeping it relevant and making sure that every new employee knows it and that existing employees don't forget.
Yeah. I think so. I like the approach. Clearly, you need the indoctrination, and I guess sort of examples or manifestations kind of help bring it to life. How and I really like the thinking, like I think in general, oftentimes the most successful approaches to maybe modifying security or an industry is actually learn from what worked. And so taking those types of approaches and trying to avoid saying principles again and again, often creates security principles about what's right, getting the security tools. Clearly, Snyk, we're keen to be one of that. And giving those examples sounds super useful, I guess, and applicable, right? For the same approach.
Yeah, and to your point about finding what works, we also try and use the language of bright spots. So instead of focusing on all the places where we went wrong, say, wow, when we did this feature or this way of implementing something, that was a bright spot. And then you shine a spotlight on it. You talk about it in your all hands. You put information in channels about it. And so then people are like, oh yeah, I can see this is the right way of doing it. This is the path we should be following.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And it's fully aligned with, any sentiment or talk if you talk about celebrating security successes, it's spot on. I think it's around highlighting when it works in a world of security, which kind of does its own job of highlighting when it doesn't work. So you need to do it. So I guess on that note, maybe taking it back up a level, you're the chief product officer at Snyk. As a product leader, how do you think about security? How does security play into your strategy?
Well, it's kind of the table stakes. So we have our OKRs and they're ranked, and our top OKR is security and reliability. If you don't have security, you don't have customers. So we take it very seriously. And I said we review our OKRs weekly, and we actually review our security tickets. And are they in or out of SLA? Our CTO and myself look at the list of what security tickets are in or out of SLA every week.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I love the sort of the approach. It's part of the reason we trust Snyk with our own data here at Snyk.
Thank you.
And how do you think, like within that, I know you build some security specific features as well, security capabilities. How do you decide about those? How do you evaluate, I guess, or prioritize security features?
Yeah, so there's the security of our platform, and then there's working with our customers. So we just work very closely with our customers. We meet with the CISOs of all of our customers, and we find out what's important to them. So we implemented things like enterprise key management, that our customers hold the key, and international data residency. And so it really is, we're letting our customers lead the way and making sure that we're meeting their needs. The thing that we find out with large enterprises, they're very different. Some people, mobile session management is the most important thing, and other people don't care about it. But you want to make sure that you're doing what's going to make them feel secure. So we have a whole team devoted to security features for our customers.
Yeah, no, and I think I remember being quite impressed by, I think it was around that sort of key management when there was a great demonstration of those capabilities to the audience, to the sort of the Snyk user base. And what I loved about it was, security is so often just about risk reduction and how do you, not lose data, avoid the damage. And I think demonstrating and highlighting how Snyk is a secure platform and has these secure capabilities to actually contribute to the top line, to actually sell more, sort of be more successful with your product. I thought that was kind of a job well done there.
Oh, thank you. And it's very important. Now, our enterprise customers, it's the top thing on their list.
Yeah. So I think Tamar, this has been fascinating. I think I can kind of grill you with questions here for hours. Just maybe, as you might know, I host this podcast called The Secure Developer, and I get a chance to sort of give smart security leaders a stage to share their views. I'd like to ask you, when we end, the question I ask every one of those guests, which is, if you took out your crystal ball and you looked at the reality of someone sitting in your chair, sort of in this type of role, in 5 years' time, what do you think would be most different about their reality?
I love that question. I'll give a cheap answer, which is it's going to be something that I don't expect. But but a real answer is, the nature of work is changing, and anybody who thinks we're going back to pre-pandemic days and everybody's going to be in the office 9 to 5, I think it's wrong. I think we are going to be going from where we are today forward. Where we are today, everybody's at home. Everybody's used to being at home. People will go back to the office. The office will take on a new meeting. The office will be where you congregate and work together with other people. And we're going to need way better tools. We're just scratching the surface of the enterprise tools to make people's work. And so you're going to see a lot more innovation in how we have a digital first employee base, because people kept working during this pandemic and were productive. So I will go back, because I don't think it's good to never meet in person. So we will meet in person, but we're not going to go back to the rigid 9 to 5s that we were. And I think that's exciting. I think it's going to open up new opportunities that we don't know about.
Yeah, no, I definitely ascribe to this. I think you're right with that vision. Tamar, thanks a lot for these insights. I really do think that some of the best learnings that we can apply to evolve security and move it into this sort of modern world is to learn from non-security surroundings. And I think few have done that as successfully as you have in your career and specifically at Snyk. So thanks for coming on and sharing your views.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thanks everybody for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of SnyK.